You want to put it to my presentation? Hi, I'm Shana from Three Streams Farm, and Laura here, Laura Noble, is helping me because I can barely look at a computer screen, but I did make these slides on goat walks. So I'm Shana Hanson from Three Streams Farm, and the latest phase of my leaf obsessions has been leaf silage, tree and shrub leaf silage, and I have two SARE projects overlapping and both ongoing. And I'll be telling you about the leaf separator machine and harvest yields along field edges, cattle, sheep, and goat intake rates and amounts, and milk yields of 5 goats and a cow, milk quality, a little bit on that. Lipid IDs are from Julica Santos Ortega's recent work. And nutritional analyses are in process, but I'll give you kind of a summary. And leaf tannin information from Wayne Zeller's recent quick screening, not so quick, but plenty of work, I'm sure. Thanks to him. I'll keep moving because we're going to try to fit this in the 45 minutes and have plenty of discussion time. Why? Oh, this isn't working to turn it, to change the next screen. Which it does when I do it on my, without being on my, here we go.
So maybe you just press the space bar.
The space bar, okay. So thanks to SARE, we're funded a little bit and a fair amount actually in the second one now. Well, I mean, the first one was just as much, but the leaf separator, it's hard to make a prototype of a machine on a farmer grant. And you can find the most recent reports are at netsare.org, or you can find all the reports, including recent report links to them on my blog spot there. And also a lot of information about leaf fodder from other people and climate stuff. And SARE is funded by NIFA. Here's my herd picture from last year. Their wide bellies are upon return from wandering 3 to 4 hours. So when a herd is collaborating with a human herder, a knowledgeable human herder, they can consume up to 1/3 more than an animal handed the perfect diet in a stall. And that's Miriam Provenza's information. And this is Angelo, and he's bigger now. He's now 1.5 years old. And actually, I'm on his back in that picture. Here's our chain flail leaf separator, thanks to Carl Hallen at State University in New York, Tully Biomass Research. And it didn't just happen. Carl tore it apart 3 times and put it back together. And he also had an accident which delayed fabrication, but he pulled it off anyway. And here it is, all ready to go. There's feed rollers in the front. We're kind of ducked under them to take this picture. And stiff things can go through the flails and be connecting with the back rollers, and then they get carried right through. Smaller stuff uses the wavy belts on top, which are a John Deere from a parts of a John Deere corn head on a harvester. And we're closing that gap between those belts. So this is what it does well, is any stiff species, it makes intact leaves. We thought they'd be ground up, but they're more intact, which the animals actually appreciate. This is what it doesn't do well. Here's hawthorn and any species that's really angular. And this was especially old growth at Mafka, very angular, not long pieces, and never breaks. So any kind of bush that's good basket material tends to be more tangly because it never breaks once it wraps around. And so then you have to get out the sharp nippers, or we stopped with the hawthorn, and we used the state-of-the-art leaf separators. The animals, I have 12 mouths going at once. This actually is from a tall pollard at my place. Nice oak leaves. But, and they are state-of-the-art, 12 mouths going at once. We can't beat that. They're very fine at which part of the plant they pick, but they don't store anything for winter. So here we have leaves in barrels, thanks to the machine. And we made like 77 barrels worth. The separate barrels served our needs for having separate samples and harvest dates and species separate and everything for all of our studies. So I hogged 48 of those 77 barrels worth for my trial at my farm. here's some of the trees at my farm. They're very tall. This is 5-year growth. This is 1-year growth. This is not cut yet. Those 3 are ashes. In front is various species, pollarded shorter. And this is the bottom of my pasture, but I can't drive around my property. This is a total, I have 2.5 acres of grass, and that includes all the patches. So, so I didn't harvest at my place for this particular project. I harvested at Mafka along South Parking Field, the second South Parking Field with a south facing tree front, Why Not Farm and Faithful Venture Farm. And we were at Mafka longer. Why Not Farm wanted to, Susan wanted to cut her hay, her first cut hay before we came, which made a lot of sense because we were on her hay field. And then nobody could cut their hay before mid-August. And so we ended up in blueberry harvest before we went to her place. So we were longest at Mafka, longest in lineal feet and days. And here's the lineal feet per barrel. But Mafka didn't have as much manure and also less moist land than these 2 rich farms that have more livestock around. So they had better yields, less lineal feet per barrel. 1 barrel is 30 gallons. And here's the gallons per lineal feet, gallons of fresh leaves per lineal feet. So here's Mafka, the second stretch. This is the one with the hawthorn. This is a cherry probably. And I went along with a pole chainsaw, 9-foot pole chainsaw, and with a brush saw for the bushes. Now that was the only site that really had a significant bush layer, and that also could have brought down our yields a little bit per hour as far as hours put into the barrels, because the bushes, you know, don't have as much as a tree. These trees were twice as tall, and we were cutting off really a lot of leaves at once. Then there were at Mafka, next was 2 stands that had creeped out into the field. So width 15 feet from the stone wall and 11. And so the quaking aspen and the birch were deeper swaths. So I did square feet per barrel here at the end, 68 feet for the aspen, 77 for the birch. That's partly because the birch was one of those tangling, strong basket, good for baskets, poor for leaf separation, I should say, and wound around easily. So I'll show you in a bit how that worked. So this is the aspen, very big trees, lots of trunks, very heavy stuff to take back out of the field, but easy to fell into the field. And we could use every leaf because aspen, the twigs break easily, so they don't tangle. At the end, you spend an extra 5 minutes if you want to pull sticks out of as you're packing it. But the leaf separator really only took 10 to 15 minutes per barrel. Most of the time was, you know, limbing, felling, limbing, moving stuff to the machine because we didn't move it along that frequently. We just ran stuff to it and then moved it again. This is Ghetto, Mustafa Altuma Zakaria Ghetto, and he was 23. He must be 24 now. He was a couple months before that came from Sudan, and he answered my ad and came and helped partway through Mafka and into blueberry season, and he was awesome. And he's very strong and young. So, and he helped braid all these branches in on all of the top pieces of the gray birch because otherwise they would tangle. And this is the bottom piece here on the ground that we couldn't use the side branches of. So we limbed them and took them home like a truckload a day to my animals, which kept them busy while we were gone. There's me carrying, thanks to him taking a photo. Ghetto took that. And here's him running the machine. I did all the chainsaw harvest, and the brush was immense, especially from the gray birch. So I thought maybe it'd be better vertical than horizontal. We would have liked to have a large chipper with feed rollers backed up to the machine and also, you know, have it feed then. So it could have automatically received what was going through the machine. And then if you had a dump trailer behind it, that would be really awesome. But we didn't. We had to haul stuff back out of the field. And this is the inside of that teepee. It's still standing now. And at the bottom, I don't know if you can see because I've got people's pictures in front, but there's a little no smoking sign we put in the middle because that's birch. It's quite flammable. But that was up all through the fair next to the parking field. And here's side branches, and my goats would eat all the leaves off in the time that I took to get from the truck and bring the next armload. They were eating it that fast, even though They usually tell me that they prefer birches, well, especially gray birch, but all the birches after frost. They prefer them after frost, and also poplars after frost. But they did eat those fresh leaves, and they could avoid the catkins. They don't like the catkins. When they do it themselves, they can avoid the catkins. The catkins kind of break up and get all through it. So it was well received, even though we cut in July there at Mafka, that gray birch. But when we gave them the silage, it was very limited, the July cut. So here, so at the end of my trial, I had a bunch of barrels left, and we thought that Susan's sheep, who eat almost any leaves, would eat them, but it didn't have a great reception there either. So she gave these barrels back. I stiffed one of them, which was the one we made when the machine first came, 1st of October. We made 1 barrel of gray birch at her place, and that smelled different to me. Now, it had ensiled for an extra year, but it also was cut after frost. And so I hung a bag of that and a bag of this from Mafka at the same time. Now, this is not being well received. 1 goat is nibbling it. 2 of them are eating first cut August hay with lots of dead grass instead. And this sat here 4 days, the same weight and size almost as it started. But the other bag that got hung at the same time, this is like 10 minutes into it, mobbed by goats, and 5 minutes later it was gone. So that's either about when it was harvested, which was later, or about an extra year of ensiling, or that the catkins were mature and maybe they're not as terrible as when they're green. I think it's mostly about the harvest date and maybe about the ensiling. The ensiling we're going to know because we're saving some of the Mafka barrels and try them again next year. And we'll know we'll find clues to all of it with some testing that I'm going to tell you about later. So Wynut Farms, side of their hay field, we came there after blueberries mostly. And so this here is like a cut cherry tree, and it was just as tall as this. So we got a lot at once there, and that actually was really only 10-year growth. But she has rich ground. Susan Littlefield is the farmer of the milking sheep there. So we went along this edge, got quite a bit, and then the fair happened. I went there end of September to the common ground with the machine. It's slow to take on the road. And when I came back, I stopped at Faithful Venture Farm for 2 weeks with the machine, and then we came here and got some more on this other side next to her pasture. So this is ash, and actually this is just before the fair, and the leaves were not turning from the fall. They were turning because of fungal damage, yet ash is always well received by animals. So Faithful Venture Farm, people say, oh, it's been bred out of the Holsteins, but look at this browse line here. The Holsteins take every leaf, and every time, so they were in my study in 2018 as well, my other SARE grant, SARE 18-897, and they like leaves. So the trees there were lush, and that was our most efficient site for person hours per barrel. For these 2 ashes, this is a white ash and this is a green ash, and this is all the first week of October. The white ash is starting to turn, the green ash is not. I got 2 barrels off of that tree, 1 top, 1 bottom. And the white ash is hanging over this big apple tree and killing part of it. So I thought it's a good tree to talk London into me pollarding. So here they are cut. That whole stretch, I was using hand tools at their place because I really didn't want to lop these nice trees off so low. And yet we had better time. These trees were 1 hour per barrel for everything, including the 10 to 15 minutes of leaf separation. And this tree, now you can see that dead part of that apple, which would have just gotten more and more shaded out. So now they'll get harvested like every 6 years and keep them off of that apple tree. Nozina helped me haul all the hay to my trial. And this is the year before, but she was hauling like 4 or 5 hay bales this winter. I was pushing it over the humps. Our path isn't as good this year. She's my retired guinea sow. She used to sell piglets. This is my I'm not sure what's happening.
That's somebody who's not muted, maybe Chris.
Yeah. I'm just going to keep going, and we'll save your questions, write them down, and we're going to have plenty of time after if I whiz through all of this. So write them down. So this is a rotation leaf silage and first cut hay period, then a rotation hay only period. And in the hay only periods, I replaced the 2-hour period of feeding leaves with feeding second cut hay, kind of similarly to how I fed the leaves. The second cut hay was higher protein and really green and wonderful compared to, it actually came in at the same time as the first cut hay from a different farm. And B rotation same and C rotation same. And each of these is the measured period, and in between there were 4 days unmeasured. So the measured periods were 7 days long. So there was 4 days of transition, then 7 days, 4 days, 7 days, like that. I divided the leaf, so the leaf silage dry matters were for all the goats because I fed all the goats together, and separately for the steer. The first cut hay was across all the animals because they all lived together. So I used percentages and divided it up so that we could see some idea of the separate groups, the milkers only, the non-milkers of the goats, and the steer. And here's the dry matter in the leaf period, average, dry matter in the hay period only, average, including the second cut hay instead of the leaves. And each time for each group, they ate a little bit more dry matter in the hay only period, but that difference was in the amount of first cut hay. The second cut hay ended up averaging the same dry matter as the leaves. So why are they eating more first cut hay when I give them good hay than leaves? Well, we think, Susan and I think that the animals get more satisfied with leaves than hay. We've been watching them. We don't have great data on that, but it seems that our first suspect is the non-fiber carbohydrates being 2 to 3 times higher in the leaves. That is what the nutritionist has to say, and that might be why that happens, but it also could just be day length, because here we started just before the solstice, and each week, you know, of leaves, we were later and longer days. Total dry matter per day averaged out 50 pounds of dry matter for everybody together in the leaf period and 52 in the hay. So here's the steer. He ate 1/3 of his diet on dry matter basis in leaves, but he would have eaten more. The first period I gave him more. Then I started limiting it a bit because I was trying to have 3 full rotations for the milk trial with the goats. And also we were only giving them 1 meal a day. They would have been happy to do 2 meals a day like this. So another year, it would be nice to have a lot more and continue to study this. So, oh yeah, so I wanted to go back to, I don't know why it's jumping so fast here, but how do I get back to that? Usually I go back and I want to go back to, there we go. Thank you. I don't know how I did that, but I don't need to
lag.
So Angelo liked cherry and then ash. And if you gave him cherry and ash, he'd start with the cherry and go alternate between the two. And he loved oak and honeysuckle. The gray birch he refused early on. The maple he pretty much refused. That has anti-feeding issues. We'll talk about that soon. The poplar, the aspen, was mostly quaking aspen at the end, big tooth aspen. He started out by eating it, and then by the end, he wouldn't eat it at all. So he experienced some kind of maybe nutritional interference or anti-feeding issue with the poplar. And as I said before, my animals in the past have told me after frost is better with poplars and aspens. So now we're ready for the next one. And so we were going to test just gallic acid or gallitannin, one or the other. In our 2 grants, we wrote it differently. We had this lab that was going to do it, but I hadn't actually talked to them, and it turned out they only do horse urine and they don't do levels. So that was recently we found that out. It was my mistake. And I went back to Julica Santos Ortega, who did our lipid profiles, who's here in Maine and connected with our blueberries. She sent me to Ruth Welty, who has high performance liquid chromatography set up for volatile compounds. And Ruth immediately sent me to these guys, and it's a go. They're going to be doing it. It's expensive testing, but it may give us clues also as to what nature of fermentation we have going on here, because nobody seems to know, even though cattle were fed this stuff for 6,000 years, not in plastic barrels, but certainly ensiled, or most likely ensiled, probably in pits. So not only are they going to do levels of free gallic acid and then hydrolyze and do total level of gallic acid, so we'll know what part of it is connected to larger molecules. They're also going to do an untargeted assay and name these various chemicals that are present. And so when we give them an ensiled sample and a fresh sample, we can look at the differences and have a clue maybe to the fermentation. Plus, we can maybe find clues to the issue in the poplars and the issue in the birches. So here's Norway maple, and the gallic acid, which was our original target, which they are going to do, is, I think, probably less, or in any case, the anti-feedant issue, we know whatever it is, it might be the gallic acid is predictive, but is less in Norway maple leaves by far than in red maple leaves or rock maple leaves. Now, also, the bark is really good feed in rock maple, but not in Norway maple. So this all tells me that along with being more snappable in the Norway maple, like you can hand harvest easily, and you don't want to climb them as much, but they work great for pollards, you know, that you don't climb, that you just snap. That this is an experienced fodder tree from Europe, and this is not. So my animals live on, when I'm not doing this trial with all these barrels, they get a lot of fresh brush from red maple, and that's a big staple for us. So anyway, the maples vary. The striped maple is also seems to be unguarded in both bark and leaves. But I want to see if the gallic acid or gallitannin or one of those is predictive. That other picture, I went back again. I don't mean to make it move, but when I move the mouse, it moves. This is ash, and this bright green is actually more like this color. And that was when I harvested in the rain. Sometimes spots of that happen. And Carl, Helen, and I, Carl's my technical advisor on the second grant. He also made the machine. For the first grant, he and I suspect there might be butyric acid happening. When I did fermentation profiles on silages like this in 2019, we didn't find any of the acids present in grass or corn silage. So that tells us the fermentation is different. But yet we didn't do ones that were harvested in the rain. So maybe the butyric acid is showing up. We're not sure. In any case, the other that isn't as rainy smells like molasses. It's just so awesome. They still ate this part just fine, but they don't like it as well. Here's my milk trial. And so in the leaf only periods, if you average them all together, now they alternated leaves, then hay, you know, A, and then B, leaves, then hay. But here I've lumped the leaves together in this chart and the hay together in this chart. And the total amount per day we were getting, not very much. This is no grain. This is no concentrates, just hay and leaves. 5 3/4 pounds about, and in the hay only period with that higher protein second cut hay in place of the leaves, they got 6.5 pounds about per day total. There was a couple goats of my 5 there that were milking that were giving 1/4 pound, so they weren't hardly counting. One of them went way up afterwards. As soon as I started giving them the fresh maple, she kind of like freshened and went up to the top of the herd and peaked at 4 pounds a day. So that was hugely higher after the trial. But I really think that this trial set them up for higher milk. Their milk amounts were higher than I've had in the winter ever before. Oh, I'm just trying to get to the bottom of that because I can't see it. It's behind all the people.
Do you want me to move the people?
Can you get rid of the people? I'm sorry, I don't want to get rid of any people. I'm just getting rid of your pictures so I can see my chart. And Laura's going to do it. Yeah, because I can't see. Yeah, there we go. That's awesome. So I wanted to say that the last leaf period, our milk was actually higher than the last hay period. And so there's also this day length issue that's going along with time. And in the end, per dry matter, now we said that there was more first cut hay eaten in the hay periods. Pounds of milk per pound of dry matter were only 0.01 different. They were slightly higher in the hay period. So that's enough said about that one. But Megan Smith was my intern from Maine, Sustainable Ag. She's graduating this spring. And she made these lovely graphs. And the green is the leaf period. The hay colored is hay period. This should be just 4 days in between and 7 days for the periods. but it gives us some visual of where the periods fell. And each of these lines is a goat. So this was the goat that was a 1/4 pound, and then afterwards she went up to like 4 pounds. So each one's a goat and their milk yields over time. And behind there is the dry matter eaten. So you're seeing a general rise. I'm seeing kind of like, it seems like it jumps and then plateaus. So it jumped at the beginning of the study from much less actually to the leaf period, and then jumped again and then kind of plateaus, jumped again and then went down a little and then jumped again. So that's the trend I'm seeing from that. I like the visual. Thank you so much, Megan, for doing these graphs. And here's temperature. I wondered whether, you know, they have to eat more dry matter when it's cold. So there should be an inverse correlation, but I'm not really seeing it. Possibly if we'd attract rain, that might have shown something. Here's the dry matter intake and the temperature. This is the mean temperature here per day, and I'm not really seeing that clearly, that inverse correlation. But so here's, I didn't have funding for this part, but it only cost me $130 to send a bunch of samples, 1 sample from each goat per period to Dairy One. And the reason it was so affordable was thanks to Faithful Venture Farm. Glendon Mahiran hooked me up with the milk trucks there that take his samples all the way to Dairy One, because Organic Valley. So thank you, Organic Valley, for trucking my overnight delivery. We cannot get overnight delivery from Belfast, Maine to there in town. Plus it would have cost a lot, and it still would have been 2 days. So there was a little more fat, but butterfat in the leaf period on average, 3.34 instead of 3.19% of the milk. The total solids were the same pretty much in both periods. There was more milk, remember, in the hay period, but the milk was similar. Protein seems to be the same, even though they were eating way less protein in the leaf period. The lactose was a little higher in the hay period. And then these are fatty acids, and this is freezing point deposition. And there's one crazy number there that brings this one way up, and I'm not sure what that's about with Gemson. We'll have to look into that. There's more lipids, though, than those 3 fatty acids there. Julia Casantos Ortega and family came to help with our blueberry harvest, and they came 2 weekends and participated in the crew. And then the 3rd one, they were rained out, and then the season ended due to Drosophila fruit flies really early. But in that process, I asked her what she did, and she said she studies lipids and proteins at Maine Health Institute for Research. And I said, ooh, maybe someday you can look at my milk. Lo and behold, she has been so generous, and thanks to Maine Health, they have been letting her do this with the incredible mass spectrometry machinery over there. She's worked on weekends. She's driven up to Belfast twice with her family, with Carl, her husband, and Noah. This is Noah. Noah befriended Angelo, and here he is. And he brought 2 friends that day. It's been very fun to have them come. There's been music. And here I have, so there were hundreds, she says there's hundreds of lipids in my milk in both periods. And of these ones that had differences, they were all present in both the leaf period and the hay only periods. And these spikes were higher in the hay only periods, and only one was higher in the leaf period. And then we've got a really interesting one down here, DGST, which is a betaine lipid. There's only 2, I think 2 others that are marine lipids, and they're in marine life, and this is the terrestrial one. And my friend Steve Byers, I think, told me that that lipid is supposed to be good for helping creatures deal with the cold, which really tickled me, because my babies, if I let a buck have free reign, they have their babies last day until January or 1st of February. So these are a lot of lipids. And I'm wondering, you know, the hay only period that day. So this was 1 day in the leaf only period, and then 1 day in the next hay period. And this was the C rotation, when actually something was higher. I think the milk amount was actually higher in the leaf period. But anyway, so she averaged across 5 goats, 1 sample each on 1 milking in the leaf period and 1 milking in the hay period of the C rotation. And then she went to other farms, and actually Abraham's Creamery goat milk also has that betaine lipid and higher than mine. And that's a little bit more conventional diet, but also in some ways unusual because she's doing an excellent job over there. So these are the two that had the greatest difference in my milk, and both of them were higher in the hay only period. So here's Tilden Pond Farm, John Morse and Wendy Morse, and this is Betsy, their mini Jersey. And John was good enough to have a milk trial over there, just 10 days on with leaves and then 10 days off to measure milk without leaves. And at the beginning, the milk was lower and jumped up almost a quart, and then it jumped down again and stayed there after. And what he did was give her 2 feedings, and it added up to 7 pounds of fresh silage of leaves per day about. And he gave her same first cut and her same 8 pounds of grain, which was cracked raw grain. And she got kind of the runs from this period of leaves, but she gave 1 pound, 10 ounces more per day on average, which is about 3.5 cups more milk. Her total milk was 21.775 pounds in the leaf period and 20.15 in the hay only, with no second cut, nothing in place of the leaves, just adding the leaves and taking them away. We did not measure her first cut intake of hay because there was another cow eating with her on the hay. Here's what she ate. She got honeysuckle and quaking aspen. There was 1 day of black cherry. And this is just pounds of leaves, 7 pounds, because Betsy had John removing all the sticks for her, and he measured those too. And the other thing I want to say is she's only milking on 2 teats, so that's a pretty good milk yield for 2 teats, Betsy. Here's Faithful Venture Farm, and we had a group of Holstein heifers, so no milking trial here, and really too many animals, 14 to 16 of fairly large animals, to have enough leaves to really do a full-fledged trial. So I decided to bring them back, or to keep 1 barrel of each of 4 species for them, and it was harvested at their place because they are certified organic. So this is the Elm Day. In 23 minutes, they ate a barrel. There were 2 pounds left. I gave those sticks back and they kept going. Well, it was 37 pounds of stuff, but I steal each time 2.5 pounds for sampling. Then the red oak was just as popular, but it took them a lot longer to chew and they left more sticks. And after about an hour, I decided to bring the rest to the goats because it was 10 degrees on each of those 4 days in January. Those are cold snap. This is green ash. This is all that's left of a barrel in 30 minutes. This is the black locust. That was the last day. Or no, not the last day. Anyway, they ate that whole barrel in about 25 minutes. And this one heifer knew how to crunch the sticks, thorns and all. They preferred the elm slightly, but when it was given without elm, because I previewed it on the elm day, but when it was given but without elm, they were just about as quick at this. And that is high protein feed right there. So that would make some milk if we had more barrels. Unfortunately, it's not as invasive as it sounds. I don't hardly have any anywhere around me. Here's Susan Littlefield at Why Not Farm. And I'm hoping you can see my whole screen with where it says Why Not Farm at the top, because I can't. I've got other things popping across it. So I'm not really seeing my whole slides. Yep, this is ash. And this was a couple years ago, but this is the same stand where I was harvesting ash at her place. And we had pollarded some for, this was like first pollardings of small trees, but really leafy trees. And she was taking it to snap into 1-ton totes and let it dry in her hay barn, because she's done that for years for her sheep. And she still likes to do that better than my machine. And here's her sheep. And this was in the summer. I think last summer we were bringing some stuff of shrubs that she wasn't sure if they liked or not. This is arrowwood, I think. And the arrowwood doesn't work great in the machine, so I was mostly feeding that fresh. We didn't have big amounts of it anyway. Oh yeah, but I wanted to say about hers. she's got, on the other side, she's got a long, long manger with a sideboard, like a kind of like a flat area underneath it with an edge. And so she can spread out a lot of leaf fodder, a leaf silage for them and really see what happens, because she used to have 120 sheep and this is 15 now. And these are milking sheep. These are Frisian Dorset crosses. So here's Meadow Sweet Farm, and they got the dregs. They got that gray birch that nobody wanted. And yet some of the beef cattle really wanted that. They selected it. They had their silage at the same time, their grass baleage, I should say. But it took them a while to really finish. Not all the cattle wanted it, but the ones that did seemed like it was valuable to them. And the sheep, I didn't take pictures of them. I hung a couple bags. They weren't supposed to be in the trials, but they didn't really respond much. They nibbled. And so this is the SARE grant before. This is a little ram and like 4 or 5 other sheep crowding some ash silage. And here's somebody doing yellow birch. Yellow birch is less anti-feedant than the other birches by far. And unfortunately, it's not in this study because it's at my place and it wasn't at our 3 sites. Here's a poster that I made for the Grazing and Livestock Conference in Vermont after the Vermont grass farmers gave me $1,000 mini grant to do the nutritional testing on the SARE 18-897 samples. So that was all stored samples. We couldn't compare fresh and ensiled that time. And they were also dried samples, chipped, dried, chipped, ensiled. And here I had and that grant had a lot of palatability testing, and I rated species per animal group as far as preferences. You can look up that final report on my website. And also you can look at this because we'll post it later. Probably Monday it will get posted. This year, we were supposed to make these pictures of texture. We were thinking it was going to chop up the leaves, but they're all pretty much intact leaves. And so these are some of our texture pictures of leaves that came out of a leaf separator, different species. And we do have fresh and ensiled pairs this time. And it does go down a little bit, but not drastically, not much. Susan fed hers out, leaving the tops just loose because she said her hands didn't want to deal with those rings at all. And it stayed fine over like 4 days time, which Carl, my technical advisor, Carl Hallen, who made the machine, he says grass and corn silages don't do that. Ours always smells wonderful, and it's a real different smell. So I think the fermentation is completely different. 2 to 3 times as much non-fiber carbohydrates as grass silage. And that was, confirmed again. Higher mineral contents are different minerals per species, big, high, on different species, different minerals. So it's really good to have an array to feed them. Lower protein than grass hay, except for black locust and buckthorns. I think both smooth buckthorn and European are high in protein. Now, Steve Gabriel's SARE grant, he did some testing on black locust and European buckthorn. We're going to have more on glossy or smooth buckthorn because that's what we have more. So the nutritional testing doesn't tell you anything about tannins, and people are knowing now that tannins help utilization of proteins for ruminants. Helps them digest them in a most efficient way. So Wayne Zeller received some of our samples and did a screen for condensed tannins, and it's a HCI butanol acetone iron assay. And thank you, Wayne, for providing some of your information to me and us. And I'm going to use a couple of 3 of his photos. He's got more. He's got a whole little slide deck you can talk to him about. But I'm using his photos here and just to show you an idea of what happens. So this is the Regent Blank, and this is bird's foot trefoil for comparison. And the darker it is, the more condensed tannins are present. So these 2 shrubs, pagoda dogwood and honeysuckle, don't have a lot, and these trees do. Here, this is white ash. It has almost none. And that is the tree. What? I'm sorry. Is the tree that is planted as a pollard to feed sheep in Basque country next to the sheep barns. Here is The darkest thing in the middle is black locust. That got a 10. That's the highest tannins. But these are all different tannins, probably. And apparently no one's identified what the tannins are in regular old tree leaves, yet they have lots of funding for bioengineering of leguminous crops such as white clover and alfalfa. And the organic people are limited to bird's foot trefoil, which already has tannins. So Wayne hopes, and by the way, Pagoda Dogwood has an A. My A sticks on my, I didn't get to fix that. My A sticks on my keyboard. So here's the numbers off of his chart. I hope I got them right. Whoops, that went back. And I lined them up by amount so that you can see. So white ash was 0, green ash is a little more, and those shrubs, and then creeping blackberry was actually dried in our first cut hay, and I was curious how much tannins they were getting just out of their hay. Not that much. Basswood and Norway maple are both, I think, fodder trees. Well, I mean, it would be European basswood, but in any case, they can be eaten so unlimited by animals, and they are low in tannins. Now, tannins are good for digestion, but certain tannins definitely have limits and are limiting factors if they're eating it as a substantial part of their diet. So smooth buckthorn is fairly low. Winterberry, they eat in the fall most, and that's our local holly. A whole bunch fell in the 5 range. I'm surprised that red oak has no more tannins than that. Box elder was entirely equal to bird's foot trefoil, except of course these are, this is just a screen and we don't know if the tannins are at all the same. Box elder has some anti-fedent issues, and we're doing some testing on that about those with the red maple. It's probably a gallic acid issue as well. The birches and the aspens are a little more, and that also maybe correlates with the anti-fedent issues. And white birch is even more, even though it's preferred, in my experience, to gray birch. And black locust was well loved by everybody every time I've done anything with it. So who knows, that might be a really tolerable tannin. Who knows? We'll find out maybe more if Wayne Zeller continues to explore this, which he is planning to do. Thank you so much, Wayne, for all this information and for your work. So trees are important, and it seems like they're going to be a good resource. They were for 6,000 years, or maybe 8,000. And this was on the wall of my bedroom. It's a piece of cloth from Switzerland. And I would lay there wondering why the trees were so little and the animals were so big. Well, they're pollarded. And here's these fastigiate columnar forms. And here's a little painting on paper from Japan that somebody gave me. And they have those same columnar forms with these little climbers and sprouts coming off of them. Here's my demo plot from the SARE 18-897. We climbed with ropes. It was crazy, but look what the oak does. This is an oak. So we cut off the top. There were no other branches. This was a closed canopy originally, 60-year-old trees, and they sprout right almost to the ground. And we won't even need a ladder next time on the oaks. Here's that demo plot, a wetter part, and Carl gave me a lot of willow cuttings, and then I guarded some other trees as well. So this is the fashion show of tree protection, because sometimes when the animals are present, you still want some new trees to happen, especially if you want some lower pollards that you can reach. And so these are 1-liter soda bottles, and I'm going now to 6-foot posts. And in the pasture, I run wire from the edge of the paddock, and when I light the paddock, the trees have wire wrapped around those soda bottles. The soda bottles kind of keep it off of the tree, and that works great. And then when they go in the woods with me free, they are a little more leery of those ones that don't have wire. This is a white oak pollard that's cut out way out here, and it has 3 posts with 6 rows of wire. That's what it takes for goats. Electrified wire. So fields used to have trees all through them. This is a David Delas drawing, or Delas from France. And this is a wheat crop, and this is grazing. And the plow, I guess, did this. And so I am told by Ingvild Austad and others that the root dieback and regrowth gives this pioneer effect of releasing nitrogen to the ground layer. So when you harvest the top, the root does a parallel thing and let's go a lot of root hairs, and Ninemetz et al., which is forestry literature. They say that such root turnover is the best assurance against soil waterlogging and drought. So it adds resilience to both waterlogging and drought to have all that carbon being layered into the soil by the act of pollarding and, you know, continual or cyclically harvesting the canopy. Also, the tree draws up moisture and shares it with the ground layer. And then the leaves fall on, this is probably a 3-year pollard, so they let it grow 3 years and then cut it. That shadow moves during the day. It's never a large top. That keeps the grass and the cattle in optimum temperatures so that the grass can optimally photosynthesize and the farmer is more comfortable as well. So here's our next piece, or the second piece of the fashion show. So this is Elliot's spiny cages at Meadowsweet Farm, and there's some of his beef cattle, and also sheep stay away. He's got welded wire 14 gauge with 2x4-inch holes, and he cut every other upright at a very sharp, literally sharp angle, bent them outwards. Watch out when you're doing it. For goats, it's now a 4x4 hole, so I probably would need another ring around the inside that's not cut. And those are little apple trees that are doing great, and you put a lot of wood chips to keep the grass down. So the best fertilizer is the footprint of the farmer, and also the trees fertilize. That's my presentation. Thank you so much for Hannah for hosting us, and she's probably going to do some facilitation for our discussion. I'm not sure how we're doing on time. Thanks to Carl for everything. Thanks to Brett for telling me to do a webinar. He's my technical advisor for the first grant, and Carl is for the second. And thanks so much to the farmers, the other farmers. And so there's one more slide, which is me. And phone is the best way to reach me, and definitely call me and talk about this stuff because it's my favorite thing to talk about. And, you know, I wander with goats all the time and a steer, and enjoy human contact occasionally. So that's it. I'll leave that up. And so Hannah,
Stop share so you can.
oh, well, I thought I'd leave that so they can see it, but
Okay.
But Hannah, so you can, I don't know what time it is, you can take over or we'll open it up.
Yeah, I'd say maybe leave that up for another like 30 seconds and then we can
Right.
come back to the room.
Yeah.
Thanks so much, Shana. It was really great.
How'd you
We
do
have
the
some
time?
specific questions, and then we have I think maybe some more general ones. So I can read off at the chat, and then also, you know, if people want to come off of mute or raise your hand, you feel free to. This is a discussion, and you know, come on camera, say hey, that kind of thing.
And let me say that Carl Hallen is here also, who is a cattle nutritionist and also made the machine. So people can ask him questions. I think Wayne Zeller might be here, who did the tannin screening, and he's a chemist at the U.S. Dairy Forage Research Center in Madison, Wisconsin. So people can ask him questions. I think Julika was planning to be here. I don't know if she is. And she's doing the mass spectrometry with the lipid profiles. She's planning to do proteins also.
Great.
So there's more than me that can answer questions, and probably some of you can as well. So
Awesome.
pipe in if, you know, this is a discussion, hopefully not just a wheel going out.
Awesome. Shana, do you want to stop share screen so we can come together and
Yes,
see?
it's Laura doing it. Thanks, Laura.
Thanks, Laura. No, Babette, you don't have to put your question in the chat. If you want to come off mute, you can. I'll start off with one of Catherine's questions from before. Is Catherine still on the call? She was wondering if black cherries are an exception to the toxicity issue that cherries are said to have, or does it not matter in
Let me
silage?
speak to that right away. I forgot to mention that. So we do have hydrogen cyanide testing going on in this. And so far, I didn't get around to sending the rest of them. And there's going to be more next summer because our new grant has more of that. But we sent one pair. We sent the 2022, when the machine first came, we sent that fresh sample. And then we pulled an ensiled sample of the same harvest and sent that later. And it definitely went way down, which is what is known about brome grass. And that's why the lab in Iowa at Iowa State does test for hydrogen cyanide, is because people make brome grass silage. And they said 60 days is, lots of sources say 60 days is considered safe. Now, our fresh sample on that time was well under the threshold of 500 whatever for toxicity. It was like 100 something, but it went down to 23. So yeah, ensiling makes it safe. It's a gas. It goes away apparently. It's like a molecular change in the leaves, and then it disperses.
Great. There was another
But we're going to
question.
confirm that further. So, you know, wait, and we'll have more solid data on that.
Catherine was also wondering if you noticed any taste difference on the leaves, maybe like species by species, or
Yes,
milk, I
tastes
think
and
maybe
smells
sometimes.
are very different and all wonderful, except I don't really like the smell of the box elder, and that has some serious anti-pedant issues sometimes, and especially with wilted, I think. So we're going to be exploring that. And I was actually tasting leaves sometimes, like the cherry, you just have to taste it, and it tastes really fruity and wonderful when it's ensiled, and it also gets softer and easier to chew. And the willow's kind of.
I think so that's good to know. And then I think what she actually means is, did you taste any difference in the milk depending on the leaves that were being fed?
Well,
I was wondering both.
We were feeding them 2 or 3 species on the same day each time. We were giving them an array. But in the rest of life, I do taste difference. When I cut a whole bunch of ash, I love that milk. You can taste the astringency coming from the tree leaves. And I've given milk to other people in winter back when I used to cut a lot of cedar, and they were like, your milk was so cedary. We loved it. So sometimes you can taste it more than others. Usually it's positive though.
That's great. There's other questions in the chat, but if you want to come off of mute, I invite you to raise your hand and come off and say hey and introduce yourself and ask some questions. Go ahead, Babette.
Okay, does anybody else have any questions that you can see?
Go.
Okay, all right.
Quickly.
So I have, so Shana, this is totally awesome. I mean, you've gotten so much into the science of this, and seeing all the animals eating the different things, very exciting. I have actually 3 just practical questions about how you go about doing this.
Sure.
Okay, so let me just throw them at you quickly. One is, what is a linear foot of harvest? Like, what does that mean?
Oh, yeah.
How do I think about that? And then the other is, you mentioned braiding of the branches. Like,
Right.
what is that? Like, what do you do? How long does it take? Why do you do it? And then it was interesting to hear that Susan from Why Not Farm just stores her branches that she
Yeah.
cuts. Okay, you said that very quickly, and it would just be cool
Sure.
to know,
I can
like,
speak to
what
all
does
of
she
those.
actually do?
Yeah.
Okay, so that
Well, and
those are my-
Susan
yeah.
might be here. Is Susan here? Don't know. She was invited. She might have come, but she wasn't sure if she could or not. Anyway, so let's see. So remind me the first one. I think
What's
I-
a linear foot of harvest?
Yes, linear foot. It was along the field edge
Okay.
because it was a fairly flat field edge, and mostly the side canopy is right there, you know? So I was measuring how many feet we went along the side of the field.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
So how many?
That makes sense to me. Yes.
Yeah. And the Susan's question of drying. So if you look at our SARE 18-897, we actually dried whole leafy branches. So traditionally they would snap like 1 meter sections of branches and make sheaves, and then they had these beautiful stacks and racks. They're in lots of my presentations, lots of historic pictures that I've pulled from books. In my other presentations posted on that website that's on the first slide of this, and we will post this too. Yeah, that last slide also had my website maybe Hannah can stick my website in the chat for people, but that takes a lot of hand power, and it really takes a village full of families, and we're kind of socially fragmented now. It's hard to do labor intensive stuff anymore.
Mhm.
So we were just doing whole like 8-foot branches, and the best way was actually Nick Jackson was stacking his, he was in that study, vertically with the leaves up and the butts down around a post, and then wrapping a rope around and adding more and then putting a tarp over it. So we have tarps, so we can do that. And that worked fine, and they dry right under the tarp. Or you can do it in your hay barn. If people have a big barn, they'll throw whole branches in and just let them dry. I think if it's shorter, it probably keeps a slightly more quality, because I think some of the goodness gets drawn back into the branch maybe. But anyway, so drying is a thing, and drying was traditionally for sheep. I mean, yeah, for sheep and goats, but cattle and hogs were supposed to traditionally get either ensiled leaves or cooked leaves, and the cooked leaves were heating water and soaking the dried leaves in it, either overnight or on the back of the stove, you know, keeping them that way. And that was said to be so that they could digest. So if cattle are just eating leaves, they may need it to be ensiled or cooked. They may not be able to just live on dried leaves. They do eat dry leaves, but
Mhm.
you know, that's when they have hay too. So in the middle question, remind me.
There's the braiding of the branches.
The braiding, okay.
Yeah,
So
why do you
Ghetto
do
and
it and how do you do it?
yeah, well, so number one, don't bother, because the gray birch wasn't so great. That was specifically these 18-year-old gray birch trunks that were like 6 or you know, at least 4 inches at the, no, they were probably like 5 inches at the base. And we were cutting the 3.5-inch spot and running the top piece through and having to take the other branches to the animals. And then they didn't like it that well in the end. Anyway, if we'd have cut it younger, you know, it would have been better. But they had these long floppy branches. And so we were just kind of like bending the branches in, starting at the top and going down it and layering them over each other so that starting at the bottom. I'm sorry. I'm not even sure how we did it. We bent them all in and kind of hooked them into each other. And it was fairly quick, but it was adding time. It took us like so that it would go through the machine without tangling, which then it did. So we were taking 2 hours per barrel, including the 10 to 15 minutes of running it through the barrel, through the machine. So, you know, that was longer than like ash took us 1 hour, and this is person hours. So 1 person hour per barrel on ash versus 2 person hours on the gray birch doing that. But if you had the gray birch exactly right, I'm hoping to study gray birch because it's in my blueberry field, and I can have different ages of things and try them out and figure out what's optimum for, you know, size as far as being able to run it through the machine. And also I'm going to do it after frost when they really like it. Is that enough on that?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Super.
Thank you, Babette. Who's
Great.
next? Jump in.
So, sorry, can you clarify that the silage is only for cows and hogs, whereas goats and sheep didn't need it fermented?
I think so. They still like it fermented. And
Okay,
Ingrid Austad in Norway had done chipped silage for sheep. And I asked her and I asked other people, and it seemed like the listeria issue that keeps people from feeding other silages to sheep and goats is probably not an issue for leaf silages. But yet traditionally it might have been an issue for them because they might have been doing pits in the ground. See what I'm saying?
Right.
So the listeria comes from dirt, and it comes from dirt that like the roots pull up when you're making hay.
Right.
Yeah, so that's maybe why that is. But and maybe just drying is easier, and so if you just have sheep, you're going to dry it. But I like ensiling it because it's really easy to move these barrels around, and I can keep reusing them for a very long time once I have
Right.
them.
But,
And
you know,
then
if you don't have barrels, then drying I think is easier because you can just.
exactly.
Now, I wonder about just like, you know, stacking them vertically in a barn or something where they get airflow.
Yeah, that's
not
okay.
too
And they
not
don't
too
need a lot.
thickly. You know, I mean, I'm just constantly clearing brush on my property, so if I'm doing
Awesome.
some of that in the summertime, then putting aside instead of just piling heaps to
Right.
rot and become soil and
I will
burn
say that, so we did both in SARE 18-897 from my demo plot. So those were mature trees. They weren't pollarded trees. Pollarded trees are tastier and juicier and, you know, younger growth. And all these trees in this study had all been cut before, so they were younger growth than my first
Right.
6. But
Right.
but there is an issue where sometimes they like something fresh, and then when you dry it, they won't touch it.
Yeah.
And so sometimes I think trees become guarded. So trees have defenses, and trees, when they're stressed, are less tasty. And so it may be that some branches sort of like stress as they're drying. So they'll eat it when it's fresh, when you cut it, but when you go to dry it, then you take that out in the winter and they won't touch it. Whereas
well,
in siling, it kind of keeps it,
uh-huh.
like if they liked it fresh, they're going to like it in siled. That's my experience.
That's
So there's
what I
some
was
little
wondering.
risks about drying.
Because when you dry something, you know, most of the chlorophyll is evaporating out and a lot of the nutrients with it. Whereas I was wondering about the silage, because you're fermenting it instead of drying it, and if it retains more of the nutrients.
Yeah, and it's not like it's sloppy stuff. It's barely, you know, it's aromatic from the tree aromas, and then there is a bit of the fermentation smells as well. But the fermentation is kind of subtle. I mean,
Yeah.
they're almost fresh to the point where our first samples that went to Dairy One in 2019, they mistook them as fresh samples, even though I had written on every single one of them ensiled. And so they didn't do the ADICP because they only do that on ensiled samples. That's how
I mean,
fresh
it's not like you're doing a wet soak or something for 2 months. It's just you're stuffing them dry
not
in the
wet.
barrels.
Yeah, they're not wet. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm just
Sometimes
wondering,
they're wet.
we're on a smaller scale. We only have 7 acres here, and mostly it's edge that we have to cut for
Yeah, which
hardwood
is great.
species. Other than actually, like, have you done any, weren't using any hazelnut? I mean, we're growing a lot of hazelnuts right now, which will be coppicing.
Yeah.
So I think hazelnuts are actually a prime fodder species.
Yeah, so my animals like hazel in the fall and possibly and also in the spring, but they don't really eat it in the summer. And my bucks like it better than my does. So there may be some limitations for making milk on hazel. It's all guesses, it's all anecdotal at this point.
Yeah.
I haven't done nutritional tests on hazel, nor
I mean,
any
I
of the
don't
much deeper
think
testing.
I'll be silaging hazel because coppicing I generally would do in the wintertime when there's no leaves on them. But it's just still the species I have a lot of now. But well, you know, I have mixed hardwood here, so we've got maple and red maple and sugar maple and oak and cherry and ash and birch. But yeah, it's exciting.
So some species are just as good in the winter as in the summer. And you know, always before I didn't, like I said, when the animals eat stuff, they don't save it for winter. And usually it's hard for me to keep up cutting and have anything left for winter because they all want to eat it on the spot, and I'm usually with them. And so I would then end up, but yet my animals diet has been half tree stuff all winter, every winter, because I'm cutting fresh stuff for them. I'm cutting some conifers, but I'm also cutting a lot of apple and other fruit woods because I prune for other people. And then
fruit woods, the
red maple.
is really
Red
good.
maple's a huge staple for us. And sometimes they'll eat ash bark, and they'll eat tips of lots of things. And this was a thing. So my New Hampshire, my NOFA New Hampshire presentation for 2022 had a lot from Ingvild Austad and Leif Haig's book, which is in Norwegian, but look at my presentation. It's posted on my website. All of them are. Because that talks about RAS, which is RAS, which is twigs with buds, and it was particularly a late winter thing, or at least, I guess late winter. People would cut that for their cattle, even the twigs with buds. Lots of species, like at least 5 species that were listed in her book.
I mean, I know the goats will strip branches of bark very happily. I've been a couple weeks ago, I was feeding peach branches to my rabbits.
Oh yeah.
Well before they started budding.
I have a wonderful picture of little piglets.
You know, so prunings.
Picking peach leaves that just fell are like candy, and so are mulberry leaves.
Okay.
So, you know, when they first fall, and sometimes I would hand strip when they're ready to fall and just get them all at once.
Right, yeah, collecting leaves in the fall is like a no-brainer, like, of
Right.
course, like, there's a frost and all the leaves are falling anyway. If that's good fodder, then,
Yeah, and sometimes it's very good, and they also did a lot of ensiling that. I have a picture from from Michael Machacek's Austrian book of a huge pile of sweet chestnut leaves being ensiled for hogs, but that talks about it, and it sounds like it's aerobic. It doesn't sound anaerobic. He says that the guy's watering with the watering can just enough moisture so that it ferments but doesn't compost. And it's a big open pile under a leaning roof, and it's at the bottom of a hill, so they hardly had to rake to get them all there. Yeah, so there's stuff,
Cool.
you know, stuff that people used to know that we got to figure out.
yeah, indeed. Thank you.
Matt, did you have something about the ensilage or wanted to come? I saw you come off mute. I want to make sure you have this space.
I just wanted to make sure that I understand the process, the ensiling process. I mean, basically, you're just stuffing them, packing them down into your plastic barrels.
That's right.
And sealing them with a lid, correct?
Yeah, the sealing is important.
Yeah.
How much air is there doesn't seem to be that important. We had half barrels that were half full of air that sat for like a month, and then we finished filling them later. In fact, that ash that was molasses smelling might have been one of those. It might deteriorate a bit, but not too bad. As long as there's no airflow. If there's airflow, you get this white fungus that's actually fairly edible, and Susan's sheep actually like that fungus. My animals are like, they prefer it without it. I tend to eat it if I see a chunk of it. But yeah, but airflow is the key thing as far as I can tell.
Does packing the barrels tight make a difference?
It makes more efficient use of your expensive barrel or your used barrel that you had to collect.
But it doesn't necessarily impact the product.
I think it will impact nutrition some. But we don't have good data on that yet. But I don't think it's going to be a huge difference.
Right. Does that answer your question, Matt?
Yeah, of course, if you don't have the machine to strip the leaves off, it's a little bit of a different situation, maybe a little more time consuming.
You can do chipped, but then it's like 40% wood if you do like 1 inch diameter limitation. You know, if you do everything down to 1 inch, then it's like 40% less nutrition, and then you have your bedding kind of in your same barrel. But they'll pick through it and get it, especially if you shred and it's like bigger pieces for cattle, for sheep or goats. But cattle like it finer, so then if you chip it for the cattle. There's also possible winnowing of, if you have a drum chipper or a harvester, you know, a big chipper, the pieces come out more regular, and it may be possible to winnow leaves out. So we're gonna hopefully explore that, Carl and myself, possibly Lucas Tree, who works with me a bit eventually.
That sounds like a possibility, actually.
Yeah. Oh, so what were you yeah. Anyway, keep going. Someone else, I'll think of what I was going to say.
My name's
A chipper is easy to feed.
Right.
Yes.
What's happening? He wants to talk, but I'm not facilitating.
Yeah, you can. It's okay. It seemed like there was a little. I can't see your name because it's under iPad, but you're welcome.
Oh,
to go.
okay. My name's Gordon. I'm from Ontario. Gordon Thompson. And if you can if you'll tolerate a newbie question, how long do you have to ensile the leaves?
Yeah. So, well, they like them fresh, and so they like them the day after you put them in the barrel. And it goes down a little with ensiling. So the only one that I suspect was better after ensiling a long time was the gray birch. And we don't even know if that was a factor. It could have just been about the harvest time, like the season in which we harvested it, because I already knew that they do prefer it after frost. The trees have defenses, and sometimes they let them down before they drop their leaves, and they say, hey, now you can eat me, you know?
Okay.
So,
all right. And is there a maximum period of time that you can ensile, or do the leaves go bad after?
Yeah. So these
a
are
certain
good
period of
questions.
time?
So let me backtrack to the first one, but cherry may be a different issue. So cherry is the only one that we know that you might want to wait 60 days before you feed it out if you're worried about hydrogen cyanide. Myself and Susan Littlefield, we don't worry much about it because our animals seem to be all clued in and they know what to eat and what not to eat. But you know, you can't always trust that your herd has this knowledge if you haven't done it before. So cherry, you know, there is an advantage to waiting.
So earlier
and-
I had asked in the chat if the 60 days was like the leaf should be 60 days old on the tree, but it's actually 60 days of ensilage with the cherry to
That's
reduce the
right, for the
cyanide.
hydrogen
Okay.
cyanide to go out of it, because apparently it
Okay.
happens when it wilts.
Yeah, I
But
know
if
wilted
it's
cherry, I
spring
know is
cut,
a bad thing.
it's gonna have a higher level, possibly spring cut or wilted. So we're gonna try spring and wilted cherries, and then I'm gonna do fresh and ensiled of those and have more, I'm gonna have more numbers on that by next winter.
Right. But
But
there's
your
no
other
max.
question was, you had a
There's no
second
maximum.
question.
Yeah, is there a maximum period that
Yes,
you can leave the
exactly. You're
leaves in
so
the
good at
barrel?
keeping your track, and I am not good at that. So I have some still around from 2018, and I have some chipped like yellow birch that smells beautiful down there of wintergreen. You know, like what yellow birch smells like wintergreen. But that was chipped, so they're not as crazy about it. That's why it's still there. When I've kept it an extra year, they still eat it. Sometimes they still devour it, even in the middle of the summer. So I'm not seeing that it gets bad unless the air gets in, or there's a lot of, if there's only some in it, then there's sometimes condensation and it makes it kind of yucky. You know, if there's a lot of air in there. But mostly if it's well sealed, it may keep a very long time. That's another study that somebody, you know, some of you can get a SARE grant or some other grant and do some of this, because there's a lot of different things to explore about this. No one's really done much with it. So I am happy to share the research work.
We have a
And
couple more.
I will certainly be a reference for you, or even a consultant.
We have a couple more species questions.
Sure.
So I'll pile them into one and then you can answer them. So someone's wondering if you had to plant 4 favorite species for fodder, including perhaps 1 or 2 shrubs, what would they be? And then someone's also wondering about the evergreens. They say that their goats really used to like them when they had goats on, and so they're wondering about spruce and pine and fir and those sorts of things.
Yeah, and I really wanted to run, so our cedars had a lot of breakage this winter, really disturbing. Lost so many trees, just snapped right off in the woods. And I really wanted to run them through the leaf separator, but I had actually smashed the starter mechanism, the pull cord, and waiting for parts. So we haven't done that, but I think it would work fine. But you don't really need to. And what I was going to say to the person who said, you know, you don't have the leaf separator, but hand snapping works great on ash, willow, poplars. Like, it's almost as fast because they snap really easily. You can just do it with your hand. And especially if you're wandering with animals and you've cut stuff ahead of time and you go with them, they can be browsing and you can be browsing too into bags by snapping. So back to favorite species. So I really believe that the trees come up where they belong. They're very specific to microsites, and they do really well when they put themselves there. The more trees that I have planted, basically, I don't have a lot of trees that I've planted that have done as well as the trees that just came up. And so most of those guarded trees in my pasture are ones that were there for, you know, 15 years getting eaten down by goats. And then I put the protector on this little 6-inch tree and it shoots up. But that being said, you know, and then every species has some predator, some pest coming. So we've got the ash borers a few counties away. We've got the hemlock adelgids 1 county away. And we've got brown-tail moths all through our cherries and our oaks and our poplars and our birches a little bit, but mostly cherries and oaks and apples and pears. And apples and pears and maples are really good in the winter, fresh bark, and good for the fruit woods are awesome for leaves also, you know. but then you're competing with every tent caterpillar who also wants to browse them. So they're all different and they all have different issues, and we're in a changing landscape of our forest. My forest is really struggling with a lot of death of different species in different ways, or breakage, or this or that. When you pollard trees, they're more storm proof. If you've already done it, you know, when I pollard areas, then the edges tend to break, but my pollards don't. So yeah, so you know, ash is definitely by the sheep barns in Bosque Country. Elm is awesome, but then you got the elm disease and suddenly they all die, and then some more grow, and then you do it again. Willow is awesome, and Carl has cuttings. You know, you can get cuttings from him sometimes and from other people. Easily start willows if you have moist ground. Everybody loves willow. I'll think of more things that I should have said later. But basically, you should ask your animals, because every animal group eats differently. And even the trees themselves are different depending on the site and how happy they are there, and what the minerals are in the soil and everything else. Who knows? Even things that we don't know. The animals know all of this really finely, and they'll tell you what their preferences are.
And how does that include, do you have experience with those more evergreens? I know you mentioned your cedar.
Oh, so the evergreens. I'm sorry. Thanks for keeping
That's
the
okay.
track. I'm bad at that.
All right.
I get lost in the bushes. So cedar, white cedar is awesome. White cedar is having a needle drop issue. To me, it looks kind of like what happens with white pines, which have a known needle drop issue. And so they're much thinner than they used to be. So I've stopped pruning mine mostly. I was pruning them every 3rd year and having really lush, thick cedars, but they are very nutritious. I have not done the nutritional testing, but the deer literature says they are, and my animals say they are, even the cattle. And hemlocks are up next, except in a drought, a really serious drought year. They might not be eaten. I think they cross maybe the tannin line. Porcupines, though, also really like to do those, and so you're kind of like balancing what you do to the tree with what the porcupines are doing to the tree, and they tend to leave things long and spindly, and I tend to bring them back in, but you don't want to overcut. And then pines, I discovered that my animals actually, they took me 8 years to get through, but they want the pine bark in the summer when it's in growth mode, and they will strip it like crazy in the summer, which just, you know, wasn't what I expected. I was trying to give it to them in the winter. They eat a few needles in the winter, but it's not a staple in their diet in the winter, but it can be at certain times if you hit it right in the summer. And I have pine pollards in my pasture, which just were pines that came up, and I kind of made them shorter so they don't take over the pasture, and they're kind of like housing their shelter, you know. And so the pieces I'm cutting off are like big diameter, and they just, the bark, if it's the right moment, they strip all the bark off right on the spot of like things that are maybe 5-inch diameter. So pines, and then spruce, they like the bark especially, and they'll eat that at lots of different times of year. Susan's sheep will eat what she calls cat piss spruce. So the stinky one, I think it's white spruce. They'll eat that. They'll eat all the needles and the bark. So Susan's sheep are weird and different than my animals, but my animals do like spruce bark also. Does that cover most of the softwoods?
Do you have any
okay.
juniper?
I don't have a lot of juniper. There is some on the power line, and it's pretty bristly. But you know, in Europe, there's a juniper that's more of a tree, I believe. And they definitely use that.
I'm in the middle of Kansas, and we have what we refer to as eastern red cedar, but it's actually a juniper, and it's an invasive. It's everywhere. And I know that some of my goats will eat it. I don't pay attention to what time of year they might eat it, but I know they do.
That might be the red cedar that's in New Jersey where I grew up. It's definitely not as choice as our white cedar, which isn't that related. Like you said, that's more like a juniper. But down there, I do see a browse line from the deer, a distinct browse line on that. But it's not quite as wonderful as our white cedar.
Matt, do you want to ask your question while you're off mute?
Sure. I was curious about your pollarded trees. how often and what your method is for harvesting off of those.
So my ones at home or
Whatever,
ones?
just a typical scenario.
Okay. Okay. So so in Europe it would be 3 to 8 year cycles for fodder. And Ingvild Austad said that in Norway it was considered sustainable for the tree, that 5 years was considered more sustainable for the trees than anything shorter. But a lot of times trees and fields got 3 year cycles so that they'd be small tops, you know, because they had them in crop fields and every field had pollards. And Machacek says that in a really rich place, you might even be able to harvest every year. Are you okay? Hey, I love you. It's okay. And so let's see. So my trees, I'm gravitating towards at least 6 years. Well, you know, that demo plot that we made, that was the 4th drought in a row. We did it in 2018. It had been droughts since 2015. And then we had 1 year that it rained, and then we had another drought. So there were 5 serious droughts in 6 years. And now they're at 6 year growth, but it still doesn't look like that much to me. So I'm kind of waiting till I feel like it's the right moment to harvest. So it depends on what the growth is, you know? Like you look at it and you get a sense, and if it's getting to the point where it's like leaning way out there and it looks like it's going to break off in storms anyway and make a big mess out of the tree, that's time to harvest it. So it also depends, you know, how rich the ground is and what the weather's been.
So when you harvest, are you harvesting a percentage? Are you harvesting the full?
Yeah, so that varies by species. So oak, some species you can lop their whole top off, even at a trunk cut, and they'll still sprout adventitiously right around the edge of that cut. Even oaks and beeches, I think, tend to do that. Or, you know, I haven't done hundreds of them or anything. I haven't done a study on that, but just what I've seen is they will often do that. Whereas birches and poplars are said to need to just be thinned in Europe. That they were still pollarded, but it wasn't a pollard where you cut everything off at once. It was always leaving at least a third, in my experience, of the greenery and having a fair amount of greenery left. So if it has a small top, don't just cut it down to a third of it because it already doesn't have enough. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like you want to leave a substantial amount of greenery on those, but be cutting it back. So you're still cutting it heavier than you would like prune an apple tree. And they're still ending up with balls from Ingvild's pictures in her traditional, what's that called? The book that's referenced in my 2022 NOFA New Hampshire one that's on my website. That book that that she sent me. There is a picture of the birches. And so they were always leaving some of the sprouts on birches and poplars, but yet there's an exception to that because black poplars in England do just fine when you cut everything off of them at once.
Yeah, sure, it's probably species dependent.
Species and location and how happy they are.
Yeah,
But yeah, well, the thing about birches and poplars is you know, if you cut everything off at once, they are very ready to abandon that trunk and make root sprouts. So trees that spread by root sprouts are more likely to abandon a trunk if you cut everything off. Is kind of a hypothesis that I have.
Did you mention black locust in that?
I think maybe.
Yeah.
Now, I had the impression that people thought that black locust was plenty pollardable when you lop it off, and I did lop some off at Nan Cobby's house and have them grow off of the lopped off trunks with nothing on them. But yet I had one here die after 2 years. It grew so fast every time I cut it, I ended up cutting it like in 2 year cycles because it grew so, it was on a compost pile. They also, you know, everything, if it's on a compost pile, it tends to winter kill more. When things grow fast, they're sometimes more vulnerable in a way. So I'm not sure what happened with that one. I have very few black locusts. I had this one that seeded itself from the town leaf pile that they brought with the dump truck from the raked leaves. But we're not supposed to plant them. They're considered invasive in Maine. So we have very few, you know, because they're unfortunately not really invasive. And so I haven't been able to experiment with them enough. I'd love to hear more about those. I really love them.
Shana,
Yes.
this is Seamus.
Hi,
I
Seamus.
was just gonna say, that I've been pollarding some black locusts, and
And tell them where you
they
are.
seem, oh, in Virginia, right? Um, and they seem to do pretty well, just like getting cut back to trunk. I mean,
Awesome.
I've just been
At least
doing
in
like
Virginia.
maybe
basically.
3-inch diameter. So maybe larger ones would not do so well, but everything that I've cut like that has resprouted like within a growing season, I guess.
That's awesome.
Like some, I guess, like a couple that I did last August or September didn't seem to be sprouting very quickly, but then this spring they all are doing really well.
So I have an experience that when I lopped off trunks of ash, which do adventitiously and probably dormant buds too, but mostly they adventitiously sprout right where you cut them up at the top and make a big top knot.
Yeah.
And they'll take a trunk cut pretty well, but I don't do big ones like that. But fairly decent. Like, I don't know, I think I've done 6-inch cuts and had them be fine. But it used to be that I would cut them and I would see growth right away. And then all those droughts happened, and ever since I have never seen anything grow until the next spring. So sometimes I'll cut them off even in June, because those trees, oh, there's a thing about, carbohydrate stocking. So you want to wait till the tree has recovered from leaf out and has plenty of storage of carbohydrates. But I think ash has reached that point sooner, and I have one reference that would indicate that from the forestry literature. And so I sometimes cut them at the end of June, and then they'll sit there looking dead until the next spring, and then they grow just fine. It just blows my mind that they can sit there with no leaves for a whole, most of a year. But
Yeah.
they used to grow quickly. Like I'd see it within a week sometimes, or at least within a month, like you said, in the same growing season. And now I don't. So, I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe in a rain year I will again.
So
See.
the other thing about the black locusts is that if you cut them lower to the ground, like within a foot or two, they definitely send out lots of root suckers.
Oh,
Or
that's how you get them to do it.
like a very large radius away from the root system.
The poplars that died in the demo plot, well, the trunks died, but those trees sent root suckers up like 100 feet away, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. And just
Yeah.
making aspens. The big tooths, I don't think go so far.
The which ones?
Big tooth aspen.
Oh, big tooth. Okay.
Which are somewhat preferred by my animals for leaves, but they don't hold their leaves as late into the fall.
Okay.
So Seamus, you think there's a relationship between how high you cut the trunk and whether it resprouts from the trunk or sends root sprouts?
That's the impression I was getting. I don't have a very like finely tuned idea of where that point is, you
need to get a
more
SARE
like
grant.
more like I've gotten like 8 feet plus up in the air versus a foot or two at the ground, but not so much in between.
I've been scared to mess with them because of the horror stories of the root sprouts.
Yeah, right, and they are thorny, but I mean, the thing is, I have plenty of goats around, so anything that I don't want there, I can get rid of pretty easily.
They disappear.
Yeah.
Mine would not make one root sprout when I pollarded it at like 7 feet. The ones the one that I had, and then my other ones that are just pollarded much higher, I'm not getting any root sprouts in Maine.
Yeah, maybe.
And I don't think Nan's did either, that we pollarded higher up.
I think they're also sort of like a colony forming root system kind of thing. Like you'll have groves of them, and maybe it's more pronounced, like if there's, you know, like half a dozen trees or more together, they might send out more suckers versus like if there's just one tree and you cut it down.
Yeah, I don't know.
Does that make
It should be the
sense?
reverse.
Oh,
Yeah.
maybe.
I'll have to go back. I pollarded some young ones that were scattered on the way into a hayfield that
Mhm.
Glendon at Faithful Venture uses. So we got 1 barrel of locust, as you saw, for his cattle.
Hmm.
And I'll have to go revisit those trees now and watch more closely. But you should get a SARE grant on that,
Okay.
Amos, because you've got nice black locusts to play with.
Yeah. And yeah, I've been doing some like we have so many black walnuts, even though that's crazy because they have nuts, but been pollarding those some, and
Love that.
yeah, those are working pretty well.
I had a couple from a tree that people paid me to take down. I had to like navigate their electric wires with this tree. And I wished I'd have saved some of that to nutritionally test, but I thought it was going to be medicinal, like wormer kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And they devoured those 2 barrels like really fast.
Mm. Yeah, and the walnuts seem to have lots of like the side sprouts. I don't remember if you had a term for those, but like that you would shred
Yeah.
like all the way up
Well,
and
they might
down.
be from dormant buds.
Yeah.
There's adventitious buds, dormant buds, and what's the other one? Dave Jackie. Um, he's the one that told me those things.
Uh-huh.
The ones that lateral buds.
Yeah, that I mean, I would believe that. I don't know.
I'll make it up. He's not here.
Right.
Okay. Does anyone else have commentary or experience to share, or
I
other
just want to
questions in the
clarify what
chat?
Seamus, you were talking black locust or black walnut, correct?
Yes, both. Yeah.
I've never had, my goats have never seemed to be interested in my black walnut.
Oh, really? Because that
Oh, that's
that
weird.
goes over very well here.
Huh, okay.
I will say
It could just
mine are
be
interested
that.
in the fall.
Hmm.
They're mostly interested in the fall.
Possibly it's a timing thing. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Where you're in the Midwest? Yeah.
Everything
Or
also
maybe
depends on
could it
what
be
their
a
other sources
dryness?
are.
Could it be like a dryness thing, like you were saying with others, if there's tannins that are more concentrated when the weather's very dry?
Or they're more stressed, like maybe they're not as happy as the ones in Virginia.
Yeah,
Yeah,
we're
right.
a relatively low rainfall area. I mean, less than
Yeah. Because like
less
the
than
summer here,
a year.
well,
So
sometimes we have droughts, but
yeah.
and they always seem to eat it in the even when it's dry here, I think, but
Right, but there's
I don't
soil
know. Yeah.
differences too.
Right. So who knows? But I guess you could also like maybe they would learn to eat it more if they're not familiar with it.
Hmm.
Or
My
you
animals
don't think so?
know. Mine animals have innate knowledge, and there's no use teaching them because they've got the right
Yeah.
answer ready for what's really good for them.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, apparently there's a fair amount of literature about people teaching them to eat. There are some things that they don't know how to eat because there's some disincentive. Like, for instance, mine did learn to eat bull thistles, things that have thorns they can learn to eat.
Mm-hmm.
And the way they learned that was because I was pulling them and leaving them there. And when they wilted, the thorns weren't as scary and they learned. And then suddenly they were all going down the middles of them. Eating them.
I'll have to work on that.
I don't know if any
Both
of
of
you
those are tasty.
Yeah.
have ever experienced Osage orange tree.
I've heard there's a couple of them in a certain spot here in Maine, but
They're all over out here.
yeah, they were all over where I grew up in New
Well,
Jersey, but somehow when I was down there with goats, we didn't come across any.
Goats will
play with.
literally poke themselves all over to get into the Osage orange leaves. They're full of thorns.
Yeah. Similar to multiflora rose, where I can bale up multiflora rose and I don't have to untie it. They'll get every leaf out of that thorny bale.
Yep.
Just hanging it.
Well, this has been such a great conversation, guys. I hate to kick us off, but we're 7 minutes past time, which to me is great because it means that there's a lot of stuff to talk about. Shana, thank you so much. Thank you everybody for coming. This has been really fruitful. I will be sure to put this on the NovaMass YouTube channel, and so you guys can check it out. I'll share that link with you, Shana. You can send it out to your networks.
Emily
and I'm
will.
gonna-
My other intern, Emily McGibbony, is one that sent out those emails. And
Great.
so put your emails in the chat if you aren't on, if you didn't get stuff from my email that Emily sends out.